Right now, inside the dark, oxygen-deprived environment of your lower colon, a microscopic structural failure is occurring. We are tracking a single molecule of lipopolysaccharide. This is a highly toxic bacterial byproduct actively fermenting from the hardened, retained waste sitting inside your body. Because your natural mucosal barrier has evaporated, this endotoxin is bypassing the compromised tight junctions of your intestinal lining. It is actively piercing through the cracked endothelial wall, bleeding directly into your portal vein, and entering your systemic circulation. You cannot feel it, but this silent vascular invasion is happening with every single heartbeat. You have been conditioned to believe that resolving this blockage requires physical force. You assume that chemically inducing violent muscle spasms with Senna-T or forcefully pushing against the obstruction is the logical solution. This is a fatal anatomical misunderstanding. Forcing mechanical contractions against a dry, inflamed colon wall does not cleanse it. It creates microscopic lacerations. It literally tears the fragile capillaries of your intestinal tissue, actively pumping raw bacterial toxins directly into your bloodstream. Biological evacuation is not a mechanical extrusion process. It is a passive, kinetic lubrication mechanism governed by mucosal biofilms. Today, we are placing the intestinal microbiome under the microscope. We will examine the exact molecular structure of 4 specific biological gels. These are highly viscous, natural mucilage compounds capable of physically spackling over your ruptured cellular junctions. They encapsulate calcified biological waste, neutralizing its friction and sliding it out of your internal pathways without severing a single capillary. We begin by analyzing the structural collapse of your tight junctions and the subsequent vascular oxidation. Your intestinal wall is precisely 1 cell thick. It is a single microscopic layer of epithelial cells standing between pounds of rotting, fermenting biological waste and your highly sensitive bloodstream. Under normal physiological conditions, these cells are physically locked together by tight junctions, encoded in a thick, slippery biological gel known as mucin. When you chronically ignore the biological urge to evacuate, and when your daily diet lacks the specific molecular compounds required to synthesize this gel, your intestinal walls dry out completely. The mucin layer evaporates. The exposed internal tissue becomes a parched, sticky landscape. Without this protective biofilm, the friction of hardened waste physically grinds against the delicate epithelial cells. The tight junctions snap under the constant mechanical stress. This localized tissue damage triggers an immediate immune response, flooding the surrounding area with macrophages and initiating a catastrophic cascade of oxidative stress right at the vascular level. The blood vessels surrounding your colon become acutely inflamed, dilated, and highly permeable. This is the exact moment when the endotoxins leak through the barrier. When you introduce chemical laxatives into this already devastated environment, you are essentially pouring acid on a 3rd-degree burn. These harsh stimulants hijack your enteric nervous system. They force the smooth muscles of your bowel to violently clamp down on the hardened, jagged waste. The intense friction rips the remaining healthy cells directly from the intestinal wall. You may achieve a temporary evacuation, but the biological cost is severe vascular trauma and the complete eradication of your natural mucosal defense line. To reverse this damage, you must immediately stop forcing the tissue and start relubricating the physiological pathway. This brings us to the first mechanism of vascular repair. We are looking at endothelial lipid coating, utilizing overnight-soaked golden flaxseed water combined with slippery elm bark extract. We are not talking about dietary fiber in the traditional, bulky, irritating sense. We are isolating the soluble mucilage. When whole golden flax seeds are suspended in room temperature water for exactly 8 to 12 hours, their outer shell undergoes a profound chemical hydration process. They release a dense, highly viscous matrix of lignins and complex polysaccharides. When you consume this pure biological gel, it does not simply push solid matter through your digestive tract. It acts as an intelligent, self-leveling biological mortar. As it travels downward through the colon, this thick mucilage physically coats the raw, bleeding microfissures along your intestinal wall. It creates an immediate artificial protective barrier, instantly severing the pathway that allows harmful endotoxins to leak into your blood serum. The structural integrity of your colon wall is temporarily but effectively reinforced by this botanical gel. Simultaneously, the introduction of slippery elm bark extract initiates a highly targeted chemical neutralization protocol. Slippery elm contains specific antioxidant compounds that actively hunt and neutralize the free radicals currently oxidizing your cellular lipid membranes. It stops the cellular rust at the microscopic level. Because of their exceptionally high viscosity, these two biological gels possess a unique fluid dynamic. They passively seep into the microscopic crevices of the calcified fecal matter stuck stubbornly to your colon walls. They penetrate the hardened mass, hydrating it from the inside out, while simultaneously lubricating the exact microscopic point of contact between the rotting waste and your vascular wall. They detach the blockage passively. There are absolutely zero violent muscle spasms. There are no distress signals sent from the enteric nervous system to your brain. There is only sheer, frictionless, kinetic movement, driven entirely by the molecular weight of the mucilage itself. The toxic waste simply glides out, leaving the fragile capillaries underneath completely intact, protected, and actively beginning the healing process. We now shift our microscopic focus to the third, and arguably most potent biological intervention. We are analyzing the pressurized osmotic pump created by the precise combination of a chia seed polysaccharide matrix and ionic magnesium mineral water. When you submerge exactly 1 tablespoon of whole chia seeds into 300 milliliters of magnesium-rich mineral water, an intense biochemical reaction begins. Within minutes, the seeds absorb the surrounding liquid, expanding up to 12 times their original biological volume. This expansion is not merely water retention. The seeds are rapidly extruding a dense, complex polysaccharide network. Under a microscope, this newly formed gel structure is virtually indistinguishable from the molecular architecture of your colon's own depleted mucin layer. You are effectively brewing a synthetic, yet entirely biological replacement for the protective biofilm your intestinal tract has lost. But the chia gel alone is only half of the equation. The physiological catalyst is the ionic magnesium dissolved within the mineral water. Your colon is highly sensitive to osmotic gradients. When this concentrated magnesium solution enters the digestive lumen, it alters the osmotic pressure against the intestinal wall. The magnesium ions actively pull water molecules directly from your surrounding systemic circulation, specifically through the aquaporin channels of your enterocytes and into the colon. It creates a localized reverse osmosis effect. This is not a violent flush. It is a calculated physiological hydration protocol. The incoming water aggressively softens the impacted calcified fecal matter, while the chia polysaccharide matrix simultaneously encapsulates the entire mass. Because the magnesium is drawing fluids organically, it prevents the dangerous localized drops in vascular blood pressure often associated with chemical laxatives. It rehydrates the waste without dehydrating the surrounding circulatory system. The clinical data on this specific mechanism is absolute. By maintaining this precise osmotic pressure and continuously lubricating the internal lumen, you rapidly extinguish localized cellular inflammation. The relentless friction that was constantly triggering your immune system is suddenly neutralized. Clinical measurements demonstrate a sharp, rapid decline in C-reactive protein levels in the blood serum following just a few cycles of this biological evacuation. The biological fire burning inside your gut is systematically smothered under a thick, hydrating blanket of mucilage and magnesium ions. The mucosal barrier stabilizes, and the violent immune response that was silently exhausting your body simply shuts down. Moving to the fourth biological mechanism, we must examine the specific toxic isolation properties of cold-soaked okra water. We are looking directly at the mucilage secreted from the pods of the okra plant. This particular gel is chemically distinct from flax or chia. Okra mucilage contains a phenomenally high density of specific antioxidant flavonoids tightly bound within its viscous structure. When you consume this viscous liquid, it operates as a sophisticated biological containment system. Inside your lower intestine, You have colonies of anaerobic bacteria actively feeding on the stagnant waste, producing highly toxic fermentation byproducts. These specific toxins are constantly attempting to penetrate the fragile microvascular layer of your gut lining. The okra mucilage deploys like an invisible heavy-duty wrap. Its dynamic viscosity allows it to physically surround and isolate these putrefying bacterial colonies. It creates an impenetrable chemical barrier between the rotting organic matter and your vulnerable epithelial cells. The flavonoids embedded within the gel immediately begin neutralizing the oxidative burst generated by the trapped bacteria. The friction of the waste against the inflamed intestinal wall is completely eradicated. The biological mass is now suspended in a thick, protective fluid, forcing it to move passively along the tract, guided entirely by your body's natural, physiological peristaltic rhythm. You are no longer forcing the waste out. You are allowing it to slide smoothly through a perfectly lubricated, protected channel. Furthermore, this specific isolation mechanism reverses a hidden metabolic crisis. When your colon is chronically impacted, the constant localized inflammation and the steady leak of endotoxins into your bloodstream trigger a state of localized insulin resistance at the cellular level. Your cells become deaf to insulin, completely disrupting localized cellular metabolism and energy production. By deploying the okra mucilage to isolate the bacterial toxins and physically separate the rotting waste from the intestinal wall, you instantly cut off the inflammatory trigger. The localized insulin resistance begins to reverse. Cellular metabolism within the intestinal wall normalizes, allowing the tissue to finally begin the demanding metabolic work of repairing the ruptured tight junctions. To fully comprehend the gravity of this intervention, we must map the exact chronological timeline of vascular repair that occurs once you initiate this biological lubrication protocol. At hour 0, the moment the chia and magnesium matrix, or the okra mucilage, enters your duodenum, the active suppression of the local inflammatory cascade begins. The mucilage physically coats the exposed nerve endings embedded within the intestinal wall, instantly severing the distress signals transmitted via the vagus nerve. By hour 24, the osmotic pressure generated by the magnesium ions has successfully drawn enough interstitial fluid into the colon to fully hydrate the calcified mass. The hardened waste absorbs the fluid, expanding and softening, losing its jagged, abrasive edges. This is the critical window where the mechanical tearing of the epithelial cells fundamentally ceases. By day 3 of consistent mucilage application, the initial phase of cellular regeneration commences. With the toxic friction removed, the enterocytes begin dividing, rapidly replacing the dead and dying cells that were previously scraped away. The tight junctions previously blown wide open by oxidative stress begin to physically synthesize new adhesion proteins. By day 7, the artificial biological gel you have been consuming is slowly being replaced by your body's own synthesized mucin. The localized insulin resistance within the gut wall has normalized, providing the cellular energy required for sustained mucus production. By day 14, the systemic leakage of lipopolysaccharides into the portal vein drops by a statistically significant margin. The chronic low-grade inflammation in your blood serum dissipates. Your liver, no longer burdened with filtering raw fecal toxins, redirects its enzymatic power towards metabolic optimization. By day 30, the structural integrity of the intestinal lumen is completely rebuilt. The microvascular network surrounding the colon is no longer inflamed or dilated. It is a sealed, highly efficient absorption mechanism. However, this entire regenerative timeline is entirely dependent on strict, uninterrupted adherence to the protocol. A single day of missing the mucilage dose reinstates the dry friction and forces the biological clock back to hour 0. Therefore, precision is non-negotiable. If you choose the flaxseed and slippery elm matrix, the water must be at room temperature to prevent the denaturing of the active lignans. If you utilize the okra isolation method, the pods must be sliced longitudinally to maximize the surface area exposed to the water, ensuring the maximum extraction of the flavonoid-rich gel. If you implement the primary chia and magnesium protocol, the fasting window of exactly 20 minutes post-consumption must be strictly observed. Introducing solid food prematurely will disrupt the osmotic gradient, neutralizing the magnesium's ability to draw water into the colon. You are executing a precise biochemical operation, Treat it with the surgical exactness it demands. We arrive at the definitive physiological conclusion. The biological law of elimination is merciless. Your body possesses a finite threshold for endotoxin absorption before systemic failure initiates. You do not need to orchestrate a massive, complex overhaul of your entire metabolic existence. The intervention required is microscopic in scale, but systemic in its impact. We are prescribing a singular, highly specific physical intervention. Exactly 1 tablespoon of whole chia seeds suspended in precisely 300 milliliters of magnesium mineral water consumed immediately upon waking. This is not a suggestion. It is a biological requirement to halt vascular degradation. This microscopic volume of biological gel represents the absolute boundary between two physiological outcomes. On one side of this boundary, your portal vein continues to operate as a toxic vacuum, suctioning rotting, fermented bacterial sludge directly from your impacted colon and forcefully pumping it into your liver, your heart, and your neurological pathways. On the other side of this boundary, that same portal vein resumes its primary evolutionary function of absorbing pure, uncontaminated nutrients from a clean, heavily lubricated, and structurally fortified intestinal lumen. The total eradication of your localized vascular inflammation does not require chemical stimulants. It requires physical lubrication and osmotic pressure. The life or death of your intestinal capillaries, and by direct extension, the systemic health of your entire cardiovascular network, is dictated entirely by the viscosity of the fluids you introduce into your gastrointestinal tract tomorrow morning. You hold the ultimate physiological authority over this internal environment. The decision to either continue lacerating your internal tissue with dry calcified waste or to coat it in a protective healing layer of mucilage rests entirely inside the glass you choose to drink. Do not force your cardiovascular system to act as a secondary filtration unit for yesterday's rotting waste. Stop the internal bleeding, seal the tight junctions, hydrate the biological mass. If you are experiencing the systemic symptoms of endotoxin leakage, you must implement this protocol immediately. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a precise clinical comment below regarding your specific excretion metrics and bowel transit times after implementing one of these 4 biological gels into your daily protocol.